This is Kevin Black. Thanks for joining us on this exciting episode. I think it's going to be a very exciting episode of Black Market Leadership, but we're streaming live on LinkedIn and YouTube and Facebook. And what we're going to talk about today is the untapped element in Mission Command. I call the untapped element, which is behaviors. Now, I think a lot of you who are watching this probably know what Mission Command is, but for those of you who do not, Mission Command is a philosophy of leadership. And you could probably, if you can encapsulate, it's a philosophy of decentralization that puts a real emphasis on situational decision making. Now, it is an incredibly important philosophy. In fact, I might say the irony is the Germans in the 19th century created Mission Command for a variety of reasons based on the geography. They're surrounded by their enemies. They have to win quickly, and they need to be fast and agile to adapt to the circumstances as quickly as they can. So they really created this philosophy of Mission Command. And Mission Command, by the way, is a philosophy of leadership that you might find some irony in it. The U.S. Army, I know the Marine Corps have been trying for decades to adopt, and in my opinion, very unsuccessfully. But nonetheless, it is an incredibly important element of business. And I will tell you that in my experiences, I have been able to use it in corporate America. And I have had really good feedback, really good results from using it. But saying that, it's not the easiest philosophy to accept. And there's several reasons, but I want to give you one example. And that is that when I've used Mission Command, when I talk about Mission Command, there's a major element of Mission Command, which we call, or which is called in German. Okay, I'm gonna show some of my German. Fingerspitzengefühl, which what it means is there's a military commander on the ground. And that person can see the battlefield and read it intuitively. And that's the thing, it's about intuition. And if they could read the battlefield, then they can make a fast, quick decision on how to maneuver their forces around their enemy much quicker than their enemy. And what's interesting about this is that it's really fascinating, again, intuition. But when you learn about behaviors, and I'm going to get into behaviors, when you learn about behaviors, you start realizing that this whole idea of intuition, not everyone has it. And in fact, in my experiences, I would tell you that I think maybe a third or 40% of the people who I work with may have this thing called intuition. Now, intuition is an element of behaviors because it reflects how we process information. And one example that I give for my clients is imagine for a second you're very intuitive. And what that means is that you are comfortable in making a conclusion without having all the evidence in front of you. That's what intuition means. Wipe away or strip away the whole idea of this mystical intuition. It just means that you are comfortable making conclusions without having all the evidence in front of you. Now, there's an opposite of that, and we call this a deliberate process. That is where some people, they are comfortable making decisions only when they feel they've had enough evidence or enough of the 70, 80, 90% of the evidence, maybe 100. There are some people out there who are not comfortable with that. But guess what? That level of comfort really goes to probably 40% of the population. And believe it or not, there's probably 20 to 25%, I would say, again, these are guesstimations, 20 to 25% of people out there who can do both, who are comfortable in both. Now, why is this important? What does this have to do with Mission Command? Well, Mission Command really emphasizes this whole idea of intuition. And that's not true of everyone. So are we just saying that Mission Command is only applicable to people who have this intuition? I'd say no. I'd really say no, because you're leaving out a whole swath of people who believe in decentralization, but who may not have that particular type of decision-making style. So that's why I wanted to have this talk with you. about the importance of behaviors and mission command, because I think what you'll see is, even though, mission command is almost like a learned discipline. You have to learn it, you have to feel it, you have to go through it. But it's a learned discipline. And the example I would give you is, imagine if all of us right here listening to this or watching, we all read a book about how to write a book, learn discipline. Then we take that same type of knowledge and we say, here's your project, here's your capstone, write a book. You and I are going to write differently despite having the same education. I might write in long, fluffy sentences. You watching this might write short, declarative ones. Our styles will differ, but we can still execute the learned discipline the same way. That's what I mean by mission command being a learned discipline. There are many elements to it that you can learn to do, but the question becomes, how comfortable are you with it? And that's the big issue. In my experience as a huge advocate of mission command and decentralization, there are some people out there who love it. They gravitate naturally to it. They're like, oh, that's me. I could totally run this team like this. There are other people who will say the same thing, except when it comes down to the choice of doing it and being productive, or doing it successfully, they flounder. And why? Because they're just not comfortable with it. And this goes to the concept of behaviors. Because if you understand behaviors, you are now understanding which people are more likely or more comfortable with mission command. It doesn't mean they'll be good at it. This means they're comfortable with it. So the whole point of this talk today is to walk you through, what are behaviors, how are they connected to mission command, and so what can you do about it? So that here is my talk about mission command and behaviors. And I think, I hope you'll get something out of it. I can tell you, all my clients, when we talk behaviors, it's really amazing. But when you can incorporate it and see the parallels to a system of leadership that a senior executive could actually install in their organization to make them agile, to make them flexible, behaviors become incredibly important. Okay, so what I want to do is, before I jump into behaviors, let me give you just a real thumbnail understanding or sketch of what they are. When I say behaviors, I do not mean psychology. Psychology explains why, the motivation of why people act one way versus another. That's all psychology does. Behaviors describe how someone does it, or how people act, or how they perform. For instance, notice my hand movements. I'm a very extroverted person. I am very lively. I can be obnoxious. If I was at a party, I'd have no issue, no problem at all walking around shaking hands. That shows behaviors. It does not show psychology or the reason or the motivation of doing it. Okay, so that's a big point here. It's just how people act. Now, when I say behaviors, some of you are probably thinking to yourself, wow, like, personality tests. Well, it is true that to get behaviors, you're going to have to take some surveys. We don't call them tests, we call them surveys, because there's no right or wrong answer. It's just you. But keep this in mind. There are a lot of personality tests. I think they're a $2 billion industry. And let me say, and I'm not going to name drop, but I'm going to say there are some tools out there which are really, really good. And I'll explain some of their aspects, I think, which would be important to you. There's some tools out there which are horrible. They're basically horoscopes. There's some tools which are okay. But the big point is, my goal is to give you some pointers or some suggestions that if you're going to use a tool, here are things you should be looking for. There are a lot of tools out there. A lot of them are heavily marketed, and many of them are not accurate. And that's an issue. That's an issue, because if you want to be comfortable with mission command, you need to know who you are naturally, and not how you're role playing. And a lot of people role play, meaning they try to influence their perception of themselves around others in their organization. So that's what I mean by behaviors. And I mentioned personality tools. Personality, by the way, is a very, very broad term. I think of an idea of a cake. Think of the different layers of a cake. A personality is the combination of all those things. It could be your personal history, your work history, your life experiences, your psychology, your religion, your philosophy, either or. It's a combination of all those things. And if you're trying to find a tool that can really pluck out who you are, given all those, it's a real challenge. That's why we look at behaviors, because if you take this analogy of a cake, there are different layers, different ingredients, but the one thing that we all see, the one thing that really is just in your face, that has the most taste, is the icing. That's the one thing we always see, and that's where behaviors come in. Behaviors really are the icing to the personality cake. It's one thing that I know for a fact that you can scientifically, objectively measure. The other elements are so deep, nuanced that I'm sure there's some tools out there, but frankly, if you're an organization, unless you're the NFL and you're doing psychology reports or surveys on your team players, maybe you can afford that, but it's extremely expensive. It's there's a lot of elements to it, and frankly, it's probably just not economical or even scalable. So this is why we focus on behaviors. Now, I mentioned personality tools. When you look for a behavioral tool, if you want to write this down, I'd recommend it. If you're looking for a behavioral tool, one is this: anything that says personality, you should be skeptical at the outset. Again, I just gave an example or the reason for personality. It's too big, too broad. You're looking for behaviors. Some tools out there which are good, but they focus on decision making. You're looking for behaviors. You're also looking for a scientific tool, a tool that has been proven, that has millions of samples, that uses algorithms. Here's a hint: one tool out there that does not use its name in the name of a business. If a business has a tool's name in it, that usually is a sign, in my opinion, that is a sign that it has been bastardized, that it has been manipulated to fit that business. Therefore, it really is not scientific. It cannot be replicated over time with accuracy. If you do a behavioral tool to understand behaviors, you need to know these 4 things at least. Your natural self, that's who we are from the age of 6 to 8 years old. Everyone creates a behavioral profile, so this is how we know ourselves. You also need to know, second to that, is how you're role playing. This is incredibly important because many people role play, they masquerade. They actually have to adjust their behaviors or how they're acting based on their audience. That suggests that they are role playing, they're masquerading. And believe it or not, some people are just, who you see is what you get. Some people are not. They actually change their behaviors and they believe it. So you need to know who this person is, what their real talents are, and how they're role playing. The third element of a really good tool is to have a snapshot of their stress levels. This shows how people are interacting with their environment. If you give them too much, if you expect decentralization, and you give them a lot and you delegate to them. Some people are like, yes, they take it, they love it, they feel comfortable with it. Some people are not. They need the specifics to follow. So you need to know what is stressing people out. And a really good tool will actually tell you a stress level, given usually a certain snapshot, could be 4, 6, 8 weeks. But it tells you how this person is interacting in their environment. And if there's stresses, as a consultant, we'll let you go in and help trace it back. You also need to make sure your tool is EEOC compliant. There are a lot of tools out there which are not, and they've been sued over it. So if you're going to use a tool, make sure you use a good one. And finally, this really doesn't have to go to the tool, but the practitioner. Who are you using the tool with? Make sure that if you use a behavioral tool, you're using it with a practitioner, someone who is familiar with it and who can tie it to leadership and management. And they are not vendors. There are many people out there, coaches and consultants, who are vendors. They have a tool. That's how they shape their whole consulting gig on it. But you want to make sure that the tool is just a piece of something larger. And in this talk, we're going to talk about behaviors and how it goes to mission command. So make sure if you use a tool, make sure you find someone who is familiar with decentralized leadership, agile leadership, mission command. If you can find those, if you take all those elements right there and use them to find the right tool, you're going to probably put your organization in a really, really good footing to be agile, to successfully execute mission command. So Let's jump into it. I've given you already an explanation of what, in my experience, what Mission Command is. If you haven't read this, there's a great book out there, Adopting Mission Command by my friend Donald Vandergriff. It's a good book. It's a great book, and it really is a step-by-step guide to understand what Mission Command is and how to employ it in your organization. Highly recommend it. So let's talk about Mission Command in business. Now I'm going to give you an example here. There is a chief executive officer, and he runs an organization which is about 150 employees, and that company is actually worth between 100 and 125 million dollars a year. Now, this person is all extroversion. He's all about people. He's not necessarily comfortable taking charge unless he really has to, but he'd rather just follow strong leadership. But guess what? He's a CEO. He's running the show. So he's about people. He's about relationships. He's about making sure that everyone in the team is satisfied, that they're happy, and that they're being engaged. This sounds like a good formula for Mission Command, right? Well, over time, what happens is he discovers that he's just giving away too much freedom, he's giving too much leeway. If you have an issue or a project or an initiative you want to launch, you go to him and say, hey, I got this idea. He'll be like, sounds great. Oh, we could use that. Look, you're being engaged. You're showing your enthusiasm. You're doing this for his organization. Go ahead and do it. So he does it. And what would happen is this organization, which is trying to be a whole, want unity of effort, unity of vision, going one way. Well, when he gives his leeway out to all his people, what happens is the energy is being distributed in different ways, being dispersed. The organization fragments. And over time, you realize, despite his need and comfort and making sure that people are happy, he grants so much independence without an integrating factor, without really a good strategy, that people, he's causing chaos. No one knows, the right hand doesn't know what the left hand's doing. So what's he do? He's smart. He brings in a chief of staff. Well, excuse me, a chief of operations. And this COO comes in, and that person lays down the law. Hey, we got to be unified. We got to create these roads. So now you have a CEO who is about decentralized execution, about initiative, about showing the best, being engaged. And now he has a COO who's bringing in structure, make sure that people can be focused. And about 2 weeks into the CEO's new position, people start getting upset. My God, where's my freedom? I wasn't hampered by these rules and structure. So what do? They go back to the CEO and they say, hey, I got this idea. I got this project. Can we do it? And what's he say? Yeah, go and do it. His behavioral pattern, his natural behaviors enable them to go out and actually, again, disperse that energy. And he caused chaos. This CEO I'm talking about is a big advocate of Mission Command, the idea of being flexible, of situational decision making, of people showing their ingenuity. Except he was not comfortable with creating structures that made that Mission Command effective and efficient. So instead, he was focused on the human element, so much so to the detriment of the organization that the COO had to leave. They got tired of it. So I'm giving this example because you can find people who are very, very interested in Mission Command and the idea of, again, situational decision making, but their natural behaviors, the things they're most comfortable with. It's like writing with your dominant hand. If you're a right-hander and you ask someone to do it with your left hand, that's very uncomfortable. When you ask people to engage in a philosophy of leadership, which is really about, decentralization and personal initiative, some people love it, some people don't. And you're going to see it even despite the fact that they tell you that they're not, that they are interested in it. So the question is, how can you get people who are either naturally inclined or not inclined to this form of decentralization? Well, I want to show you a slide here, and I'm going to share the screen. Here we go. We're going to, boom. Now, this screen right now, what I'm showing you is I'm sure many of you are familiar with the concept that leadership is really two pillars of mission and people. What you're going to see is, in terms of behaviors, there are actually four major behavioral traits, and I'll walk you through them here. Four major ones. And those behaviors actually go to whether people are inclined or not to mission command, or they even give a suggestion what are the areas you should work with them to make them more comfortable. Over here, in fact, here, let's do this. There we go, behaviors. There are four major behavioral traits. Now, again, if you're using a tool and it doesn't have this particular terminology, that might be an indicator of things I mentioned earlier about the five things that you need to be looking for a really good, accurate tool. The first trait is what we call dominance. This is the take charge trait. People who are dominant, who show real high level of dominance in their work, they're about control. They love the big picture. They must have control. They want to control the big picture. They want to win. And what's so interesting about this is high Ds, if I was to give you an example of a high dominant, I would say General Patton. Here's someone who's a take charge, has to be in charge of a group. He just feels comfortable in that. High Ds love mission command. They love mission command. And by the way, let me pause right here. You're seeing all these different traits here, which I'm going to get into. Many traits are in combinations. In fact, they're all in combinations. So I'm just giving you the one trait that's really to emphasize the most of certain people. I'm a high dominant. Other people who are high extroverts with dominance behind them. I'm not getting into all that, but I just want to give you an understanding of the complexity of some of these behaviors and how they conform or don't conform to mission command. So you take the high dominant. The high dominant wants to win. What's interesting about a high dominant is that they want to win and they usually will take casualties. Just get the job done. If I can trust you to get the job done, then my trust has been confirmed. So you can see here, I think, especially if you're in the Army or the infantry, you're surrounded by high dominance always. So this is the world I grew up in the infantry. Next to that, though, actually go on the far end, see a thing called the high conformity, the conformity trait. Conformity trait, like the dominant, are interested in execution. You might call these the mission-oriented behaviors, the high dominance and the high conformists. People who have this high level of this behavior. High conformists are those people who want to do it right by the book. They don't want a 95% solution. They want a 100% solution. If there are processes if there are systems in place to do things the right way, to make sure the highest quality, that's where high conformance comes in. And if you look at this slide right here, in terms of specificity of focus, you'll find that the mission-oriented behaviors are both the dominant conformists, but the high dominants are about vision, the big picture. The conformists, you might say, are task-oriented. They're about ensuring that the details, that the excellence is achieved in the task. So think about this. The high dominant is very comfortable with the big picture and even delegation. The high conformist is about accuracy. Do you think think about your IT person, your engineer, head of engineering, who's really focused on, man, we got to get it right. Get those details right. What levels of trust in terms of delegation do you think a high conformist needs to have? A lot. If they're going to delegate to you, they have to trust you that you are going to make sure that you are doing things the correct way. And I'll give you an example. There is a great book by Colonel Douglas McGregor called Margin of Victory. And I'm doing after this, a book review on it. But there's a fantastic story about how in Desert Storm 1, Iraq Part 1, as I call it, about how an armored U.S., I think it's Armored Third Corps. Anyway, a huge Army Corps is given orders to attack deep into Iraqi territory. Schwarzkopf, the high dominant figure, you just tell by the way, how he acts and how he projects himself, says you will attack violently. You are going to be fast-paced. The commander of this armored corps, though, I don't remember his name, it's not important, but what's interesting, when you read the details about the commander, he sounds like a high conformist. Here's a person who does it by the book. Things have to be done correctly. If there's an SOP, we're doing it that way. He gets his order to attack violently, to go out and really be independent. When you read this, he's so uncomfortable. He has to execute the orders. He's got to go out there and execute mission command. He is so uncomfortable that what does he do? He orders his tankers to bring on, I think it was like 50,000 hand grenades with them. And the question becomes, what are your tankers going to do? They're going to go 60 miles an hour and 45 and stop, throw a bunch of hand grenades, and then keep moving? No, that's ridiculous. You would never do that. But the point of this is, when you ask someone who is a high conformist, for instance, in this particular example, when someone who is so focused on total quality, and you ask them to be independent, to trust the people around them, and if they don't have that trust, then they're going to take steps to compensate, to ensure that there's not going to be a huge disaster. And this example of a tank commander telling his units to bring on just thousands of hand grenades is ridiculous. You would never do it, but in their mind, they're uncomfortable, and so what we have to do is compensate and make sure we can do what needs to be done in order to avoid disaster. So to me, that even though I don't know the commander, and by the way, you never ever do a behavioral profile of someone who does not do a tool, for precisely the reason that people masquerade. I'm gonna give you one example. If you're ever interested, go on YouTube. I'm sure many in this audience are familiar. Watch George Carlin. George Carlin George Carlin and actually Robin Williams. Watch those two on stage. Very lively, a lot of energy. But then go on YouTube and watch interviews with them off the camera, off the stage, let's just say. Robin Williams, highly extroverted, running around, blah, blah, blah. You watch George Carlin, very quiet, a very private man. And when he does his things on stage, all those things which seem impulsive, which seems, I would say sua sponte, just right off the cuff, it's all prepared. It's all planned. He memorized all his shows. So this is why if you ever do a behavioral profile, you have to do it with a tool. You never, ever just sit there and watch someone because they could be projecting. So this here are the mission-oriented behaviors. Let me go back to the previous slide. Here, if you see EMP, extroversion is one element, is the people trait. People are highly extroverted like me. They could be loud, they'd be very comfortable, shaking hands. And what you find is people who are highly extroverted are about relationships. This is really important. They're about relationships, making sure that everyone is happy, satisfied, that the high EU wants to be inclusive and motivational, get people involved. Hey, we're about to take this mission on. Come on, man, let's do this. We can do this. Almost like a big cheerleader. High E's are great to be around. Next to the high E is what we call the high pace and patience. Now, these are people who are also people focused, people oriented, except they are more selective about people around them. High E's, as I say, high extroverts give out trust to everyone. Shake their hand. Hey, I like this guy. I trust this guy. They only will not trust you until you give them some reason not to trust you. High P's are different. They are about planning and process. They have to prove their value to the team. And what you find is, in terms of mission command, if you have the mission-oriented behaviors here, the dominant conformist, on the opposite end of this little seesaw or this scale are the people-oriented behaviors. On top is extroversion, non-selective inclusion. Then we get everyone involved. In terms of mission command, you have to be able to trust your people around you, trust them, to know that they're competent. High E's sometimes can give out trust a little too much. And sometimes they have a hard time at keeping people accountable. And if you're going to have mission command, you have to have a team of people that you can count on, that you can trust. If you're high E, you got to be very, very careful, because remember I gave the example earlier about the CEO of $125 million organization who is a total high E about getting people involved. And he even would sacrifice the structure of his team, the order, the processes to keep people engaged, to keep them happy. So he's a big advocate of mission command, but is he comfortable in executing it? No, he's not. And below that, we have the pace, and patience. Unlike the high extroversions, these people are very selective. They like people, but they'll like you a lot more if you're valuable to the team. If you come in and do the work and make sure that you're doing the right thing. They want you to be a good team player. And the big thing about people who are high pace and patience, they want to do things the right way the first time around. They're about planning, about preparation, about organization, about process and process improvement. So, how do they go to mission command? Well, people who are high pace and patience do not. They do not appreciate unwanted or undesired change. Chaos is not welcome in their house at all. And if chaos comes and disrupts the plan, disrupts the order, go back to the drawing table. So you can see that in terms of time, that could actually delay. That could delay. So how do you get the people-oriented people? How do you get these professionals to be comfortable for mission command? A lot of times, let me get this. How do I end this stream? There we go. Okay, no more sharing. So how do you get some of these people, these behavior patterns, to be comfortable with mission command? Well, I have found this. Let me start with the mission command behaviors. That's the dominance and high conformance. I have found there are some people out there, again, who control the big picture or want to control the outcome of a task or objective. You have to get them focused on the essentials of an element, to focus on only what matters most. Not everything matters, but what matters most. If you get them to focus on that, then that actually allows them to delegate more, to delegate. And another big thing is a lot of people, again, remember, these are all combinations. When I say a high dominant can have high conformance, high pace and patience, and extroversion elements to them. There's a whole combination. But generally speaking, what you'll find is people who are really, really emphasize mission command, mission-oriented behaviors, all focus on execution. You got to get them to develop their people, because oftentimes they're only about job number one. And I've known a lot of people who can do job number one. You know, one lady I worked with in Medtronic, a great company. You give her a task to build a bridge, she'll build it in 3 months. Perfect, 100% to the T. And if you look behind her, you probably see the bodies of all of her teammates. Because to her, what matters most is the mission. People think that comes later. So with the mission-oriented behaviors, you have to get them to understand the necessity of developing the people, a absolute necessity. Because if not, they will assume that usually people are all, they're all type A, they're all A players, and sometimes they're not. You have to step back and get into the people realm. So that is sometimes a big challenge, but something to keep in mind. On the opposite end, though, with the people-oriented behaviors, such as the extroversion and patience, remember the extroversions these people are focused on relationships, making sure people are highly satisfied. That means they have to really, really spend time. They have to show accountability. They have to get people trained, developed, and so much so that they're developing to the mission and not just for relationships. Just feeling good about developing someone is not the right marker. You have to make sure that they are capable of executing and holding them accountable to it. And that sometimes is a challenge. For the high pace and patience, these are people, again, who want to prove their value to the team through the proper planning and preparation. To do that, you have to, I think the secret is for this behavior profile, rehearsals. Lots of rehearsals and lots of war gaming. If these people can think about the potential contingencies that which could happen. In the Army, we're taught what's the worst case scenario, what's the most likely thing to happen. If you can develop these people to at least consider them, that when change comes, when chaos rears its ugly head, that they have at least thought in that general direction, and makes them a lot less uncomfortable. And if they have contemplated before, I assure you that these people, the high pace and patience, are thinking about it every day. So much knowledge, so much information. They're really contemplating this. And if you do this, and you're making them much more agile, or potentially agile and flexible. So with that, if I was just to get a summary, mission command really is a learned discipline, is the philosophy of personal initiative, flexibility, situational decision making. As I say, leadership, the ROI of leadership is compensating where strategy to compensate where strategy fails to anticipate. And you have to develop people to do that. And them just telling you, yeah, I'm comfortable with it, doesn't really cut it sometimes. Sometimes you have to get people very comfortable behaviorally. You have to make sure that they are comfortable in delegating. And how do you do that? You got to make sure that, look, they're not going to run your people into the ground, and they're not going to talk all the time and plan and prepare and not execute. So if you understand, if your people have they're high dominance, high conformance, they're mission oriented, they have to focus on the other half, the people. For the people oriented behaviors, though, you have to make sure that they rehearse, that they execute, and really that they execute, that they're not talking and planning all the time, that they're jumping into it, and that they're developing their people to the point where they focus on the essential things, what's really essential, and not every single general task. So if you can balance those things in terms of mission command, I think you'll be very, very successful. I know I've seen a lot of people really raise their game, knowing who they are, and most importantly, knowing who their team is. Because just because you have that behavioral profile does not mean that your team has the same. For instance, I've known some really hard, fast drivers, high dominance, go out there, take charge. They want to delegate, except their team are high conformists, or people who have the pace and patience, who want to plan. And if you just give them really broad general orders, they will feel lost. They'll feel like, what am I doing here? They don't know. They need the specific tactical direction sometimes. And again, sometimes there are certain behaviors which are not comfortable. They don't necessarily do that. So in sum, this is what been a little over 30 minutes. In sum, mission command is a learned discipline. Just showing people what it is does not mean that you have it. You have to get people comfortable with it. And if you want to effectively employ it in organizations, especially in the private sector, you have to start with behaviors. And remember, not all behaviors, not all behavioral tools out there are the same at all. Many of them are just the equivalent of horoscopes. They really are. If you buy a behavioral book from, if you buy one off Amazon and fill it out, not scientific. Even some of the other tools out there, which have a lot of marketing, not very good. They're not accurate. There are different elements, which I mentioned earlier. But remember, you want to make sure it's scientific. Look for those 4 things. Make sure you want to find how people are masquerading, and even the stress levels and their energy levels. Very, very important to understand what that means, because when you do mission command and you want to delegate with the responsibility, people being accountable, you want to make sure you can count on them, and that you're not throwing, a non-swimmer into the ocean. If you like this, material, please check out my connect with me here on LinkedIn, or check out my YouTube channel, Black Market Leadership. I'm gonna have many more live stream elements like this. I hope you enjoyed this. If you have any questions, please contact me at kevin@blackmarketleadership.com. That's kevin@blackmarketleadership.com. If you have any interest in the personality tools, you can follow my metrics or recommendations, or if you're interested personally for your organization, reach out to me, kevin@blackmarketleadership.com. And with that, I want to thank you all for participating. This is, again, I think this is a really fun topic. And sorry for the eyes, I assure you I'm not high on the drugs. It's the allergies are kicking my butt here in Arizona. So with that, hope everyone has a great, April's coming up. So have a great upcoming April. And again, any questions, reach out to me. And with that, I will tell you goodbye and adieu.